Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Alexander Lapa, a wonderful connection I made through LinkedIn and the incredible Canadian network of fundraisers I've been getting to know over time. David Fu, and I think he's our common connection, right? I'm here with
It was
Alexander.
him and or Tim Lucky.
Oh my goodness! So it's everybody's all the good people are getting together. But welcome, Alexander.
Thank you.
We do this DPP office hours every so often. Some people have told me it feels like every day. I'm sorry about that. Um, but I thought you had me on your podcast, and I thought people could really kind of learn about what it is that you do and how you can add value to fundraising shops. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. So my name is Alex. People don't usually call me Alexander, but I like it written down as Alexander. It seems more formal that way. But in conversation, please call me Alex. And I am a Salesforce architect and advisor for nonprofits. Um, that's basically how I introduce myself. If you want, I can go a bit more into my history, how I
Yes,
got to be. Okay.
I'd love that.
Um, it was about 20 years ago I started shifting from real software engineering type work. I come from a
Hmm.
bachelor of engineering, computer engineering, in Canada in Montreal, and switched from the hardcore engineering type work to CRM. And at that time, Siebel CRM was the popular one of choice. I spent about 10 years in that space before about 10 years ago shifting to Salesforce. Around the same time, I started working with nonprofits um, and for profits as well, kind of mixing and matching. And maybe 3, 4 years ago, I kind of went specialized into nonprofits. And that's now where I love to play. And
Awesome.
I'm an architect, so the sense is that I'm usually
Yeah.
someone
What
who
is
comes
that?
in. Pardon me?
Do you throw bricks at computers? What is that? What is a
Yeah,
Salesforce
software
architect?
architect. So I'm basically helping designing systems, right? Yeah, when you
Okay.
purchase Salesforce, you need to figure out how to make it work for you, how to personalize it, how to
Uh-huh.
customize it to a particular organization. So I'm helping building that schema, so to speak, the blueprints, but in a software
Hmm.
sense. And I also do advising. So depending on how big your team is or how big your nonprofit is, I can come
Hmm.
in at various levels. Either project oversight, advisor, coach, mentor, or sometimes I get my hands really roll up my sleeves and really get in there to do some of the dev work as well.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry I'm meeting you now because in the past I worked at a symphony orchestra that will remain unnamed unless people look up my LinkedIn profile. But that database, I'm learning. I should have said the architecture of this database is a piece of XXX. Because it was just 30 years of decisions made, one on top of each other by, in different directions. Do you come across cases like this, like just historical databases where the schema is all over the place? And is that, often what you come across?
It's probably one of the biggest part of why I do what I do, in the sense of there's
Really?
legacy systems, bad technical debt, systems
Hmm.
built by people who didn't have a more architectural or engineering type background, a structural type of approach, and it ends up being a big mess. And then they get stuck in some capacity, and then they have to call a lifesaver. And then sometimes I jump in and try to help as much as I can. So yeah, definitely, it's rare to start with a greenfield, meaning it's a brand new
Uh-huh.
system with nothing in the past. Usually, it's some kind of change from an old system to, let's say, Salesforce.
Okay, so we're going to rebrand you as the database lifesaver. Welcome, Tammy Hauda. It's great, from Germany. This is amazing. Hauda, share, tell us what you're interested in from fundraising. Why does fundraising interest you? How are you connected to this world? Margaret, fantastic member of the Donor Participation Project. It's great to have you here. And I wasn't referring to any of the capital orchestras previously. And Joe, this is absolutely great. Another member of the Donor Participation Project. So welcome, everybody. We're here talking with Alex, who will tell me off if I use his full name. He's a Salesforce architect, as we just learned. And we're going to chat, well, number one, about what people are interested in. So please ask questions, put them in the chat. But number two, about how to automate a lot of database work. So in my experience as a fundraiser, and I proposed this topic to Alex, we have a system, but then somehow we end up trying to do a lot of things that seem, too manual, essentially, right? A lot of data entry. And we kind of add that people layer on top of it. And I'm not sure we optimize that mix, the mix of people and software the right way. How does that feel as a topic for today, Alex?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to turn off the chat overlay, but please do keep sending in comments and questions for Alex. I can get this started, or if you have kind of a direction you want to take this in, but I think data entry is a huge kind of area of automation. Are there other promising areas where automation from this, from on your CRM can help? Very open-ended question.
I can, but actually I would love to take a step back and talk about the why first.
Good.
Because just because you can automate doesn't necessarily mean you should automate.
Awesome.
And I think what's important whenever you start looking at whether you can or should or want to automate, the question is, what are you trying to achieve here? It could be that there's some tasks that you have that just take a long time, that you want to simplify them, or repeated actions that you have to do every once in a while. It could be data entry errors, to your point. You might want to save some time or save some brain power. It's something you do only on occasion and you can't quite remember how to do it. So you just automate it to make it easier for you. But I think it's important to answer those kinds of questions and know why you're doing things before you actually jump into it, to make sure that when you get to the end of it, you know you were successful or not. So
the
that would
voice
be the
of
first
wisdom.
This
This
step.
is why I invite smarter people than myself on here. I'm the kind of guy who just like jumps into things. I'd love to hear from people who are listening in and participating today. What areas would you love to see automated in your own CRM? And maybe mention what CRM you guys have in your own org. I think that would be an interesting research study that we could do today. But so you tell us, Alex, what is the most common request that you get along these kind of, we'd like to save time or be more efficient? What are the most popular whys?
So in Salesforce, because that's obviously my area of expertise, it is known for clicking. Sometimes a single process might take 20, 30 clicks, navigating to various pages, and that can be tedious. So one of the common ways I see that, at least in Salesforce world, is how can we simplify that? Can we make that frontline person make their life easier and automate what can be automated? I mean, there's certain questions sometimes, depending on the nature of what we're trying to achieve, where we can already pre-fill certain questions. We don't need to ask that question. Let's not overwhelm the person with too many questions. Ask what needs to be asked, automate or calculate automatically what can be calculated, and then simplify the number of clicks. So it's not 26 clicks, it's maybe 3 clicks. That would be a very common approach that I see.
Oh my goodness, that's so funny. I just read about an AI tool that does, and the example they had that does process automation, and the example they had was a Salesforce automation where you like tell the AI, pull up a report for X person, or things like that. They're trying to make that whole process smarter. Okay, so what you actually do is, do you do any type of discovery process to like identify these opportunities for automation?
It's important. It's part of that, the why reason, right? The discovery is part of the why. So yeah, for sure. What are we trying to achieve, and what do you have currently? So if I'm parachuting into a particular situation, I'll ask a whole bunch of questions. What is your current process today? Where do you feel that you could automate things, or where do you feel there's room for improvement? What works? Because you also want to ask both sides of the question: what works and what doesn't work, and then try to figure out where things can be made more efficient and more optimal for that user.
Okay, that's fantastic. So tell me. So I'm thinking. You said. You mentioned Salesforce and lots of clicking. My past experience, right, is in the like data entry, and there's like a lot of. I always feel like there was a lot of grief that could have been avoided if we had somebody like you, kind of maybe verifying that when it says email, you're actually getting emails and things like that. You tell us, what are the kind of other types of projects that that you find are often overlooked, in this type of thing. So I find like data entry is an area where we very often kind of forget about it, and then you suddenly have all those free text fields, and it's absolutely crazy. Have you seen other Tell us stories. We love stories over here.
Data is a pretty interesting one because it is some of the most commonly found problems. To your point, data cleansing, data transformation. If you're moving from one system to another, whatever CRM you're moving to, you need to make sure that the data is formatted in a way that the new system can digest.
Mm-hmm.
So consolidating records, cleaning deck records, identifying duplicates. To your point, formatting phone numbers, email addresses, making sure the format is correct. There are various scripts and tools out there that you can use to automate that stuff, so you're not going line by line, record by record to figure out what works, what doesn't work. So there's like a whole suite of applications out there just for that purpose.
Yeah.
Let's see, what other areas besides data entry?
Yeah.
Like I said,
Well, we have an example for you here. Sorry, Alex.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. But
I was going to say the next one would be the next one would be process. Like to my comment earlier, just optimizing the process. I know that certain CRMs, for example, are very focused, so the process is probably more streamlined. There isn't as many possibilities. A system like Salesforce, which is more of a platform than just a CRM, you have many different avenues, many different choices. So kind of limiting those choices to help that user experience is a big benefit.
I see. So you help them. So, I mean, essentially, Salesforce is kind of like the world, the entire United States. You help them find the road that will take them to where they want to go inside of Salesforce.
That works. Yeah. Let's use that.
Yeah, that's great. So Margaret is mentioning CRM that's used in the arts. I'm familiar with it. It's called Tessitura. And she mentions two use cases, and maybe you can reflect on those. One is benefits. So nonprofits that offer benefits for certain gift levels. And that's a very kind of arts nonprofit type of thing. But also public media and, other orgs. Setting up systems. Do you see the chat questions, Alex? Setting up systems.
I see part of it.
Yeah, to avoid manual input. Thoughts on that? Or yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna stick with Salesforce here just because it's my wheelhouse. So in Salesforce, there is a data import wizard that you can use. Actually, there's 2 or 3 different tools you can use that are provided by Salesforce, and there are other tools provided by third-party systems. So there are ways of taking a CSV, for example, a comma delimited file, a text file, or Excel that you convert to a CSV, and then importing that into Salesforce. So you wouldn't want to have to manually enter each one, like gift entries, for example, could be another one. There are ways to automate or accelerate the entry of those gifts, but at a certain point, it doesn't make any sense. Better to go to the CSV file route, make sure the file is loaded, and then you just kind of map this header goes to this field, that header goes to that field. So for sure, once the data is clean, transformed, everything we spoke about earlier, then some kind of data loader would make sense.
So for Margaret, and I'm sure there's a comparable solution, right, in the Tessitura ecosystem, doing the work essentially in a spreadsheet. If you have lots of donors that need benefits and you need to assign lots of different levels and make lots of choices, and then give that to either the data team or be able to upload it yourself, right, and have it match into each donor's record. I think that's a...
Yeah, I was going to just add to that. And it's always better to clean the data either at the source system or in transit. Once it gets to your destination, you don't want to mess around with it too much. You want to have it pre-cleaned.
Okay. Another one, and I'm particularly passionate about this because it kind of relates with engagement and tracking engagement and all of that. Margaret says, being able to track every interaction with donors, emails, phone calls, and then being able to pull key performance indicators based on that. I think Salesforce is actually pretty excellent with that, right?
It is pretty good, yeah.
You can see emails, they go into the record.
Yeah, I was going to just add to that. I don't see too many times automation happens there. I know that there are certain tools, and I'm familiar with, I don't remember the name offhand, but there are tools especially designed for salespeople to help them track notes and certain phone calls that they have with customers that's outside of Salesforce. And it's just basically a
like
web
a HubSpot or something like that, no?
Pardon me?
Like a HubSpot or something like that.
Not even. It's a very, very lightweight. Sometimes it's even a Chrome plugin, for example, that you add that you're able to take very quick notes. It's connected already to Salesforce. You add quick notes, and it accelerates the entry point for certain interactions, activities you'd have with your donors. I'm not sure about emails, but at least phone calls, any kind of events you have. that kind of stuff, even
Yeah.
tasks and notes.
That's amazing. So, Margaret, tell us if this helps. I think you should be able to find at least something equivalent in the Tessitura is a whole ecosystem, but in the Tessitura world. But highly recommended being able to automatically sync your emails that you send to donors in the database without having to go in enter another contact report, especially for major gift officers who are sometimes a little bit behind on their contact reports. And then Alexander, another question, tracking other forms of engagement. So, anything that you may have by way of website activity, by way of email, open rates, any other, if you're in the arts, attending an event, if you're in a hospital, coming to a volunteer, activity, that type of thing. How do you solve for that in the Salesforce world?
So there's many different tools you use because there are different use cases for them. For example, people coming to your website, people who are visitors, maybe looking at various pages, downloading certain white papers or whatnot. Those you track through a marketing tool such as Marketing Cloud or Pardot, and they have a new name now for Pardot with Salesforce, which is some Marketing Cloud version, Marketing Cloud account something. I still call it Pardot. So those are tools that can basically track what they call a prospect. It's like in the initial contact points you have with someone, which you may eventually convert to somebody like a lead or a contact, but it allows you to have that history, and there's certain grading and scoring you can do before you might do some kind of reach out to that person.
Yeah.
In terms of,
you're using, let me translate, Alex, because you're using a lot of like terminology that's very common in sales, like, scoring and all of that, but all of that has an equivalent. So if you want to know if your donors are visiting certain pages that, should demonstrate a certain interest, if they're always looking at your cancer research, site, things like that. And then if they not only just click on an email, but open every single page or are on your website 5 times a day, if you know all of that, it lets you qualify those prospects in a much better way, right? Is that it?
Yep, that's exactly right. Thanks for adding that color.
Go ahead.
Okay, and then the email. So in terms of email, so if you're doing a marketing campaign, for example, an email marketing campaign, so you want to use some kind of tool. I mean, Marketing Cloud and Pardot do these things as well. I mean, there are other tools as well, but those are the ones that come from Salesforce. You could have MailChimp, Constant Contact, Campaign Monitor. And those are basically the mass mailers. Those are the ones that basically allow you to send a whole bunch of emails to a whole bunch of people, donors and whatnot, with specific personalization, hopefully, if you're doing it right. And then track, how many people opened it, who opened it, how many people clicked on a link within the email, for example, to be able to know how effective your outreach was.
Awesome. This is great stuff. And again, I'm very often see that we send a fundraising email and we have a small group of people, small or not so small group of people who opened an email 5 times. Maybe that means they forwarded it to somebody, or things like that. That usually shows interest if they haven't gone on and made the donation. So that's why that data, I tell people, is valuable. It's not just, they're not just vanity metrics. Alex, another question from Amanda. I'm going to read her comment. I've been in both Zoho as well as Salesforce and have yet to see either one be able to compete with donor management software platforms like Bloomerang. Am I missing something in my experience? I'm just going to say maybe it's somebody like Alex, because I do know for a fact that you kind of do need those rails in these really large ecosystems. But you go ahead.
The challenge with Salesforce, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is that it can do a lot of things, and the struggle with that, or the it's a pro and a con, right? It's more than just a CRM. It really is a platform, and it was initially designed for a for-profit type business. And there are packages, or there is a package that they built on top of it for nonprofit, and it's doing really well. It actually has, I think the last number was more than 50,000 nonprofits running the nonprofit cloud on Salesforce. So it is a tremendous. It's one of their biggest products actually in Salesforce.
Incredible.
Yeah, but it was built also to do many, many things. So a software like Boomerang, or Bloomerang rather, is designed for one specific purpose, and it will do it better than Salesforce will. It's like having the tool that does one thing versus the Swiss Army knife that does many things. Most likely the dedicated tool will be better at that particular job than the Swiss Army knife. but it only does that one thing. So the minute you want to do anything else, if you want to track, for example, program services, volunteer management, then a boomerang might start to show its limitations. And Salesforce then allows you to expand, to keep on going, to have no limits. It's very rare for me, for example, to see a nonprofit move from Salesforce to something else. It's always from something else to Salesforce. It seems to be like a destination. So the bigger you grow as a nonprofit, you end up going to, it could be Microsoft Dynamics as well, but it tends to be more towards Salesforce.
That's so interesting. And of course, we have to mention Blackbaud, which is huge in the fundraising world.
And there's some great great CRMs out there at the smaller level, right? There's numbers and numbers, and all do their job really, really well. I won't discount them. Just because I do Salesforce doesn't mean it has to be Salesforce, right? I want to make sure that the nonprofit chooses the right tool for their needs. It just ends up being the end of the chain, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point, which is that people very often don't either budget or plan for their needs down the line. So where, for instance, we do this huge discovery and internal discovery process. We set up the database exactly the right way for the next 3 months. And then in 4 months, suddenly, but now we have this other need. And then, needs evolve, and sometimes very quickly, right? So I do see the sense of having these huge, these comprehensive ecosystems and how they provide value.
It's part of the discovery process, like you mentioned earlier. I mean, what is the vision? What is the goal of the organization in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? As far out as you can picture, that will help you decide, what is the right tool for not just right now, but going forward into the future.
I mean, and my pet peeve is that thing changes. Like that 2-year goal changes all the. So if you started from the assumption that you're not going to know, you make different decisions.
You do the best you can with the information you have at hand, but at least you take the time to start planning something, right? It's not just do it first and then figure it out as we go along. You don't want to build that plane as you're flying it as much as possible.
Well, we tend to do that. But another pet peeve, and this is totally deviated from the automation. And Alex, if you have topics that you want to cover, just interrupt me. I blab too much. But documentation. So this has happened to me at every nonprofit in my career. You go in, oh yes, we have every report you could think of, and none of them are documented. You have unless you look into the SQL code, which very often you don't have access to. You have no idea what that's pulling. It says loyal donors, and what does that even mean? Things like that. What do you suggest? What do you recommend to your clients to manage that, right? Thinking that you're setting up a report, but maybe it's 4 or 5 generations of employees that are going to be using it after you.
Training is definitely a big element. I'm not quite sure how much overlap it has with automation, but I'm happy to talk about it.
No, none at all.
I can. There's a lot of directions we can go if you'd like. Let me just add a couple of comments on that, and I can add a couple of, because I did write some few things down in preparation for this.
Lovely.
So we can talk a bit about that as well. Training is obviously very important. These days, virtual training is more popular than in person, and one of the advantages of doing it remotely is you can record the session. So being able to provide, train the trainer or train the group type of approach and have it recorded allows you to share that with future hires. And I'm a big fan of teaching a man how to fish, or teaching a person how to fish, in the sense of making sure that the nonprofit is empowered as much as possible. They might have a local champion or a local admin that's really focused on the CRM, that's able to teach others as well. They're at least a first line of defense before they need to call for someone for support, because you don't want to have to call your implementation partner every single time you want to have a new report.
I love this. So think about documenting your video trainings and training it internally. I love. Sorry, digression. And I had to take up this opportunity. Alex, you had some suggestions for everybody on automation. Take it away.
So one of the questions I think is important to ask in terms of, the first question was the why. Why are we doing automation? The second one I would ask is the when. When is it appropriate to do it, and where is it appropriate to do it? And usually I tend to advocate for doing it once a process has been fully determined. You don't want to do it before you figure out the process. You want to first figure out the process and then say, okay, how can we now make this better? How can we optimize it? So it's generally not at the beginning of a project. It tends to be more toward the end of a project or the middle end of the project.
Mm-hmm.
Salesforce has this great paradigm called the crawl, walk, run approach, which means, first you need to crawl, just get the steps done. And sometimes moving to a CRM is a big endeavor, a lot of change management, and you don't want to throw too much at one time. You want to have to, if you start automating too many things at that time, you're starting to get focused on some of the details which may not be relevant at that moment. So focus on the small wins first, just get people into the new CRM, and then optimize.
Very cool.
And it's important to review the process to make sure you, again, reviewing the process end to end, because you could add optimization at any point in that workflow. But you're looking for things like, what are the business goals? What are the tasks that someone does on occasion that they might not remember how to do? If there's some kind of failure, you have a constant repeated failure in a particular activity. Or if there's a situation or a moment where there's low adoption, where people are not using the system, maybe out of fear or uncertainty.
Okay, so I love this. Crawl, walk, run. Reminds me of my kids. So quick plug for everybody. If you actually have more questions after we're done or when you're watching the recording with Alex here, well, number one, connect with Alex on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll be delighted to chat with you more about these things. But number two, we have a Q&A site called the Ask, appropriately. And I might drag Alex into answering questions if we have them about today. So the link is down there. Deb Best commenting, goal and design before process. So important. I think you agree, right?
Absolutely. To me, it's measure twice, even measure thrice, and cut once.
That's absolutely great. So you talked about what does this look like from a client perspective? So I guess they're thinking they might be on Salesforce already, or they might have another platform, and they think that they'd like to improve their process automation essentially. What does this look like in an engagement with you, just to help people imagine this?
Like I mentioned, you want to understand what the goals are. You want to understand what the current process is to figure out where is the easiest way to make to have automation, to have efficiency, and then just start tackling them. What is the highest priority, low hanging fruit?
At a super practical level, how long does an engagement with so they give you a call and you say, hey, I'm booked till next year, and then you start working next year. How long do these projects even take? What does it depend on? I'm just I haven't been super intimately involved with these, and I'd love to. The nitty gritty is what fascinates me.
The nitty gritty. Of course, the answer is it depends. It depends what the nature of the engagement is, what they're looking for. Am I an advisor teaching their team how to use Salesforce better? Am I the one building it, or do I have working with an internal team? So at the moment, for example, I'm working with about 4 clients, all in the nonprofit space, and I have various capacities at each one of them. So depending on what is needed is what I do, and that's the part of.
I love that.
I'm adaptable, right? I'm fluid. It's what do you need? But I do tend to stay on the higher side, the higher meaning advisory and project oversight, making sure that the team and the project is still on guardrails, that it doesn't scope creep too much, doesn't go too much over budget, and make architectural and design decisions as well, to making sure that we know where we're going, we know how to build it, even at the more technical level, and then someone else does the actual building.
Okay, because something many people may not realize in software, and now that I'm becoming more involved in this world, I'm realizing is that there are lots of judgment calls that you need to make, and some of them can set you on on the right path, and some of them can just delay you and send you down into a place where you don't want to be, right?
Best practices. You need to know the tool and the best practices for the tool. You need to know how to use the tool, right? Like any tool, you don't want to use a screwdriver as a hammer. You want to use a hammer as a hammer. So knowing how to use your particular tool, your particular CRM, is very important. Yeah, because you're right. You can go down the wrong path, end up with a lot of technical debt, and very difficult to get out of it.
Can you explain what technical debt means for folks who are on the call today?
Sure. So technical debt, I would define in this context as the cost of maintaining something. Whenever you're building something custom, you have to maintain it. whether it's version upgrades, or various types of support you need to offer. You need to consider the lifespan of what you're building, whether you're building it for short term or long term. But basically, anything you build has a certain amount of technical debt, and you want to keep it to a minimum. So staying with best practices, staying with products or plugins that have been tested already can help, because you're not building it custom. You don't need to have the knowledge to maintain it. And you don't need to worry about future upgrades and interoperability.
Okay. So it's like when you're deciding and making all these trade-offs, well, some trade-offs mean that there's work that you're actually, not doing now, but that work doesn't go away, right? Like you might have a quick solution, but then that means that at some point you're going to have to fix it. And if you ignore that, that's technical debt. Is that
You could say that, but sometimes a quick solution is the right solution. You don't need to change it again. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. But sometimes it's a bandage or lipstick on a pig, they call it. And it's meant to be temporary, to stop the bleeding, and then to take the time to do it right and design it properly and replace what you've done.
I find
it's a lot of low-level type stuff. Developers love talking about technical debt and refactoring the source code and stuff like that, changing it up and optimizing it and using the latest tools.
Yeah,
but it has to make sense.
There's so many parallelisms with fundraising. I had a podcast episode with another Canadian compatriot of yours, Mike Durkson, and he was talking about lots of different types of debt, and one of them being relationship debt. So if you're not building those relationships, you just you ask. It's like there's this imaginary debt there that at some time you're going to have to pay off or lose the donor. So
definitely, yeah, there's more than one kind of debt. Technical debt is just the one that has to do with development and operational costs.
Well, I think you should talk about this a lot more, because even Deb right now, I'm going to put her comment on screen because it's so insightful. I've never heard it put that way. It describes so much of what bogs down the database or admin folks in this work and makes all the data we're collecting less effective in our campaigns. I think this is like from a user perspective, what technical debt looks like.
Yeah, and a lot of reasons why people end up changing systems, for example, is because the technical debt has become so overwhelming that there's no escape route. There's nowhere to go other than chuck the whole thing and just start again.
No? That's fascinating. Well, Alex, I'm super grateful that you made some time today. I know you're quite busy. How should folks connect with you if they'd like to ask you more questions or look at the products and services you offer?
Yeah, two easy ways to reach me. One is, of course, through LinkedIn, as you mentioned, Alexander Lapa. Or the second is on my website, which is dryadconsulting.com, DRYAD Consulting.
Awesome. Well, very grateful for everybody who's here. If you'd like to have more great conversations like this one, meet other fundraisers, head over to joindpp.org. It's a fun place to be. And Alex, if we can ever be of service to you, please let us know. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.